Welcome back. Another day, another video, and today we're going to go ahead and talk about, once I get out of the Patreon's way, there we go. We're going to talk about what are the best decks in this format. I accidentally deleted the wrong column here. It should be tier 1, tier 2, and rogue. So C tier is rogue tier. If you're interested where a lot of this information is coming from, there is a link to a spreadsheet down below where we actively track all of the tops in the format and all kinds of other good information. But anyway, we're just going to briefly talk about some decks, go on through them, and have no fear, we're still going to go over deck lists, do deck profiles, in-depth breakdowns, and we don't have gameplay, but I might have a solution for that as well. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and stick around. Also, when we hit that 4,000 subscriber mark, we're giving away a case of cards. If we do it before set 5 release, we'll do it for set 5. Otherwise, we'll push it to set 6. And I don't see us needing to go to set 7. So it kind of depends on you guys how fast we hit 4,000 subscribers. Set 5 or set 6. And we'll give that case away. Emerald Steel, the first and foremost deck. Bucky discard. I don't think there's any surprise here. This is going to be our first tier 1 deck. In my opinion, this is the best deck of the format. This is the deck to beat of the format. However, it's actually not the most topping deck of the format. It is slightly behind Sisu on Ice, who we'll also throw up here in tier 1 right away. However, Bucky discard has a better win rate between the two decks. And when we're talking about topping percentages, I think part of that has to do with the fact that Bucky discard is like a $700 deck, whereas Sisu on Ice is closer to that $400 mark, so almost half the cost. And I think that's why so many more people are, in fact, okay, I'm like trying to sit straight here. Okay, why so many more people are playing the Sisu on Ice as opposed to Bucky discard. But overall, I think Bucky is a much stronger deck. Obviously, you're taking advantage of things like Bucky and then Robin Hood and Aladdin, which are probably the two best 3-cost Floodborns that we got in the most recent set, Ursula's Return, to be able to really take advantage of that Bucky, especially because if you run the 1-drop Diablo 1, you get to scout their hand on turn 1. That's pretty good. So you know if you're safe to make your plays. Then turn 2, you play your Bucky, and you can shift Diablo, force your opponent to discard, get him exerted, and start drawing cards on your opponent's second turn. This is a very oppressive opening, especially when you come back with another Floodborn on turn 3. Sisu on Ice just wants to get to that late game as quick as they can, and with the ramping, they get to do it a little bit sooner. They don't have to be prepared their own board away because Sisu is a absolute beast, questing for 3 and taking out everything with 2 or less strength, which in this format is very strong. What about all those pesky 3 attack characters? Well, they got an item for that too. Exerting the ice block can make a character lose 1 strength, like a Robin Hood, like a sad beast, and now all of a sudden that Sisu just eats it up. These are clear-cut, in my opinion, the 2 best decks of this format. We have set championships coming up in just a couple weeks as well, so I do think this, because it's going to be harder for people to test regularly, so watch videos, watch content, and get cards. Like I said, I'll have a video up shortly on what I plan to do and how I plan on hand testing and just testing theories, and I'm going to try to help everyone else in that same regard. So again, make sure you stick around and come back. That video should be up this week as well. Steel Song, where are we going to put Steel Song? Well, to me, tier 1 is like decks that are over 10% representation of the format. Tier 2 is decks between 2 and 10, so like 2 to 9.9%. And Rogue would be anything under 2%. If it's topping at less than 2%, it's a Rogue deck. 2 to 9.9, tier 2, 10% plus, tier 1. If we ever have to get there, 65% is that mark to be a tier 0 format. However, we really haven't been that close, despite what some people think. Steel Song is a deck that I think a lot of people kind of almost wrote off early on, but at the same time, it's a deck that usually waits to see how the format shakes out and then it just adapts to the format really well, and it usually comes on about this time in the format. Zach Bivens took it to Chicago and made top 64. I think he actually made it as far as top 32, and a lot of people started to test that deck, and I think it's going to start to see more success moving forward as more people now see the format, see where it headed, and how they want to cater their Steel Song decks. Sapphire Steel Resist Wheel. This is another deck that's going to go into that tier 1 category. I think it has a really good Bucky matchup discard, or Bucky discard matchup. I think that alone makes it very, very viable right now. Pretty much any deck in your rogue strategy, we'll get to it a little more later, but like your rogue decks, you want to have at least one good matchup in the tier 1 category and at least one or two more that are winnable and not just auto loses. If you're auto losing to 2 or 3 of the tier 1 decks, your deck probably isn't going to see very much success. So when you're building a deck or trying to think up of an idea, think about that. The 4 decks that we'll see, hint, hint, there's going to be 4, in tier 1 today, you need to have at least one good matchup, and then ideally, if you don't have 2 good matchups, 1 good matchup and then 2 toss-up matchups, otherwise you're going to struggle, and that's just kind of how the game works. So this deck has a very good Bucky discard matchup. The blue-red matchup, it's unfavorable, but I don't think it's unwinnable. I think their late game is just a little bit better, and the fact that they benefit so much when you try to wheel makes it a little awkward. But again, the matchup is definitely winnable. It's just, I think, slightly unfavorable. Jafar Wheel. Admittedly, with the new cards, I haven't tested this deck out too much, but I have played against it, and I do think there's some neat tools there. I think it needs more exploration and more people to truly optimize this deck, and maybe that's something that we'll take on and try to help those out with. But for now, it's going to sit in our rogue category because the results really are just not there. Amber Amethyst Hyper Aggro. But this deck actually, it did make it into a top cut, so it is on the list. There's, I believe it was a 96-person tournament that I got top 8 at. So once again, Hyper Aggro is a deck that can come in and steal games. It's a deck that can be interesting because overall, you're not going to have a ton of success with a deck like this typically. However, periodically, tournament to tournament, you can go in, show up, and just run the event and do really, really well with it. We've seen it throughout the formats. Mufasa Roulette, specifically Ruby Mufasa. Steel Fasa I would put down in the Rogue category. I don't have an image for it. Green Fasa, again, I don't know if that deck's really getting played anymore, but it would be in the bottom of the Rogue category. However, Ruby Amber Mufasa. So obviously Mufasa, you're taking advantage of pretty much characters. However, you're probably teching in Brawl would be my guess, because Brawl is just insane this format. It helps you out a lot versus those Diablos and also versus those Hiram Flavishams to take down the character with 6 willpower without actually having to do anything to take it down. Plus, by the time he's exerted, they already drew 4 cards, so that's not an ideal situation. The new cards like Gaston, if you pair it with Pluto, if you want to play Pluto, you can get into your 6-drop characters as early as turn 3. That's kind of insane to think about. Again, I don't know how much Pluto is being played, but Gaston, the 3 cost, is very, very effective. So essentially by turn 4, you can actually get into those 6-drop characters without that Pluto. This deck is just very strong, being able to take full advantage of the late game Ruby cards, such as once again that Sisu. Ruby Amber Song. This is a deck I expected to do a little bit more, however it just has not panned out. The color combination here has tilted definitely towards the Mufasa builds, and maybe it's just because other song decks are better, but I did kind of expect this deck to at least top a little bit. I didn't expect it to be crazy and maybe, a little higher in the rogue category, but at the end of the day, it's a deck that I think, again, needs to get figured out, and whether that happens or people just kind of write it off as not good enough, I guess I see both sides to that coin, because why try to innovate and pilot a deck when there's just other decks that do the same thing much better? To a degree, I completely understand, because if you're going to invest in the time and the money into these cards to play and go to try to win, you're not going to take something that you're unsure of. You're going to take what brings you the best chance to do it. And that's not for everybody, but that is for the majority of the competitive player base. Next up, we have old reliable Ruby Amethyst. So Ruby Amethyst is going to be our final tier 1 deck, and if we put it in terms of overall tops, those are your top 4 decks. Again, Bucky Discard does have quite a few more wins than Sisu, and overall I think Bucky Discard is the better deck, so I'm going to put him back ahead here. However, we have Ruby Amethyst and then the Steel Wheel as well. So Ruby Amethyst is just kind of that deck where it feels like it doesn't have any good matchups, but it doesn't have any bad matchups. It's just that deck that can compete versus every single deck, and it is so consistent in what it does. And for that reason, it's just always, until something else happens, going to be a top tier threat when you can just go into any format, any matchup, anything like that, and realistically have a chance, because I think their aggro matchups also got better this format. And Flynn Rider being able to take advantage of your strength on the Maui without, only challenging, you get to gain some lore off of it too, is just very strong. Moving on, this was going to be one of those fan favorite type decks. Does it pan out? It seems like every format that deck that we hype falls flat. It was the Beast OTK. It was Jafar Wheel. This time it's Lemon Lime Discard. Well, it's actually moved its way into tier 2. It was for a while at the Rogue category, but last week it did hit enough tops to push itself over that 2% mark, and it is into tier 2. This deck is starting to move up. I said it's one of those decks where it really needs to just hit its curve to be playable, and if it doesn't, it's just not. So for that reason, I'm not a huge fan of the deck. I played it, and I've played against it, and I just think it's lacking something. It's lacking like 1 or 2 more cards, and then it can be a legit threat in this metagame. Amethyst Emerald Tempo Control. So tempo, bounce, tempo control, whatever we want to go with. It's a tier 2 deck. I think that this deck is not only fun to play, it is a breath of fresh air. I'm saying that as a biased player because I am typically an Amethyst Emerald player. I've been playing it for 4.5 now, very avidly. I was on tempo very much so last format. Got my Stitch with tempo. And into this format, I've been liking a different version of the color combination that is not seeing a lot of play. However, I think that it is still very strong. But as far as the tempo build goes, you can take advantage of things like the Ursula and the Bruno. And also, obviously you get to shift onto your green Ursulas. You don't have to play the Challenger 2-cost Ursula. You get to do things like, say, bounce their Diablos before they can actually effectively use them. You have access to things like Wildcat for items. It has a lot of toolbox for the meta, and you have access to a lot of evasives too, which can help you in your Bucky discard matchup, as well as the Amethyst draw engine is going to help you in that Bucky discard matchup. Then you have things like your Merfolk and your Flynn Rider that allow you to go real aggro early, which help you in that Sisu matchup. So I think it actually has some decent matchups across the top tier. You just need to mulligan properly and learn how to play out each matchup effectively to have the best amount of success. We just did our deck profile on it, and I think this deck is a lot of fun. Next format, I'm excited for the new Merlin Shift card, but for now, Blurple is going to go down in our Rogue category. It came on late in set 3 as a very strong deck. I think this format, it just kind of got left behind. I don't know how much good support it got for the blue engine or the Amethyst. It got Ursula, but outside of that, this deck kind of got left behind as far as support goes. Amethyst Steel, we're going to go ahead and put this one in Rogue as well. A lot of these Rogue decks haven't topped yet, so that means naturally they are below 2%. Hyper Aggro has, Jafar Wheel also has. So I think right now where we're at, Steel Fossa being another one, like I said, I don't have the image icon for it. We just had the Ruby Amethyst, or Ruby Amber Mufasa. But Steel Fossa did get a top, so it would be in that rogue category. I think Steel Amethyst Control outside of Jafar Wheel is actually a really strong deck as well. I would argue it's good enough to be in the tier 2 category. Just it's not a very popular color combination, which is kind of surprising to me because Amethyst and Steel are two of the best colors in the game. I would argue that between Emerald, Amethyst, and Steel, those are the three best colors. So to see it not really see that much play just feels kind of weird. You know, you get the draw engine and the powerful cards from Steel. However, it just maybe because putting two strong things together doesn't always mean good things. Maybe it's because other decks just synergize better together. However, Amethyst Steel is a deck that you should definitely be aware of, and a deck that if you're looking for one to pilot that's a little less popular, that has a huge potential for upside, it is this deck. Mickey Mouse Brooms. This deck is so fun. I love that Brooms are actually viable. They're like one card away from being a tier 2 deck, but Mickey Mouse Brooms, I think, are a solid rogue deck. You can go to your locals and do really well with this deck. You could go to a big tournament, and if the matchups fall right, you might be able to top on the back end. I wouldn't expect you to make a strong run into Top Cut, but squeezing into it, I don't think it's out of the question. A deck that's been getting a lot of hype lately, Emerald Sapphire. So kind of like an evasive discard, and it actually has the 3-drop Olaf as like a Aladdin replacement to really trigger that Bucky. However, you obviously have your Diablo, you can come down with like your Mickey to start ramping, and then you get into your ramp and you can start dropping more characters and just really deplete your opponent's hand very quickly. I think the deck is kind of niche and very fun to play. However, I don't think that it is really that good in this format. Lastly, we have Bucky Discard again. So this time though, it is purple Bucky. This is the deck that I've been playing all format. I really, really like this deck. I think this deck is so much better than people give it credit for. And by that, I mean, no one's playing it. Like literally no. I think I tested, well, when Pixelborn was on, out of the like 140 games I ended up playing with this deck, I only played against one other purple Bucky deck. I think that we're getting really close to refining it once again. It's just kind of hard because this deck is really changing because it is so dependent on which decks are doing well and which decks, like how you decide to counter them. Because the success hasn't been there, I do have to throw it in the rogue category. I would love to be biased and put it like top of tier 2, low tier 1, because I think that's how good the deck can be. But overall, like when we look at tier 1 with this deck, I think your Bucky discard matchup is actually like probably close to 50-50. I don't think it's favorable. I don't think it's unfavorable. It really can determine in them early turns on who gets what established. You can play things like Blue Fairy, which I have gone away from in my recent list, but the Blue Fairy, if you opt to play it with your Floodborns, can allow you to counter that Bucky directly by drawing cards, and then they make you discard, you draw cards, discard, and it just kind of replaces itself that way. The deck is aggressive enough to get out early on the red-blue decks, and I think it has a very favorable Sisu control matchup. Also, Ruby Amethyst, I think my win rate was like 80-some% against that deck. I think this deck has a very good Ruby Amethyst matchup. Not only can you be aggressive and put a lot of pressure on them, especially through evasive cards. So they have evasives, but most Ruby Amethyst lists aren't really equipped to handle a lot of evasives, especially when they're making you discard in the process. So the fact that you're discarding them to really get them away from that top end Ruby game, and then you're just completely outpacing them with your Amethyst and your discards and your evasives, I think you have a very good Ruby Amethyst and Sisu matchups. So we have two good tier 1 matchups, a toss-up matchup in the Bucky, which leaves us Blue Steel. Unfortunately, I wish I could say this deck just runs the top of the tier 1. However, Blue Steel is a poor matchup, and it is difficult to win, but not impossible. I do think the Blue Steel matchup is you're more likely going to lose than you will win. If you can get a 1-1 split versus them in Swiss, take it. That is an absolute win for you. If you have to play them in Top Cut, well, best of luck, and you're going to need a little bit. Like I said, it's not unwinnable, It's just pretty unfavorable. But I do think that a purple Bucky evasive discard is very strong this format. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Consider hitting that like button, subscribe, comment down below. All of it helps out the channel. And until next time, take care. Let me know down below too, what do you think is too high, too low, and what would you change? I guess I mentioned the spreadsheet down below. I can just throw it up on the screen here real quick. Oh, I forgot all my stuff is cropped here. Well, you can't quite see it all. I guess you can see some of the percentages. That could have worked better. But the link down below for the spreadsheet where a lot of this information comes from. The tier 1 category accounts for 83% of tops. So again, 2 good matchups or 1 good matchup and 2 toss-up matchups in that tier 1 category, and your deck realistically should be able to do decent into any tournament. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.